joining for our webinar today. We're going to give it just a moment while others continue to connect to the line, and we'll start momentarily. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, this is Emily from WRI. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kevin Ma.
Emily, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I think you can see on your dashboard we have a nice-sized group, small enough that hopefully you will all have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments and add your insights. We've got folks from Cargill, Dow, Pepsi, DuPont, and Tetra Pak on at the moment, and I think we might have a couple more join us any minute. This is a webinar on food loss and waste. Hopefully that's what you plan to dial in for. It's part of a series we offer for our corporate consultative group members, and I know some of you are on regularly and others drop in for calls or topics that are of particular interest to you. So this is one of a series. The last one we had a few weeks ago was on the natural infrastructure for water, and the next one, and we'll mention this again at the end of March, is on a paper we'll just published called Tomorrow's Markets, looking at issues of consumers and consumption. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for some of those as well. I'm particularly excited about this one on food because our food program of all the programs in the Institute brings us closest to the consumer. I mean, in fact, right up to their front door, into their homes, into the supermarket, into the canteens where they eat. And I think that understanding it brings us of consumer behavior and that front end of the business model is a really important one. So I'm looking forward to today. I'm also looking forward to today because I like all the people that are presenting, as I always do. But so today we've got Craig Hanson, who's the Global Director of our food program and our forests program and our water program. Craig, a long-term person, is that the right person at WRI? Then we've got Kai Robertson. Kai's the lead advisor on the food loss and waste protocol for WRI. I knew Kai before. I joined WRI 2 years ago when I was at British Telecom, and in fact Kai was one of the people that was a good reference for me, a good reference for WRI when I was thinking of joining here. So thank you for that, Kai. She suggested it was a great organization to join, and I'm pleased I did. Kai was also at BSR prior to WRI, even at the World Wildlife Fund and at the Food Marketing Institute, so public, private, every aspect of the food world. And we also have joining us Kristen Rainey from the Global Food Program, the Vendor and Supplier Relations Manager at Google. My first instinct many months back when we were talking about Google as part of the food program was where food fitted in. Kristen oversees a program that has over 200 cafes in over 50 countries around the world providing food for Google staff, so brings a very important aspect, a very valuable aspect to our program. And prior to Google, Kristen was also at Sodexo and worked with a number of different organizations through Sodexo. Kristen, we'll give you a chance to add any details that I've missed out later on, but I particularly appreciate you're with us. I understand you're just back from Brazil last week, so thank you very much for being able to join us on the webinar. One of the things we really hope we can do on these webinars is have you ask questions, but even more importantly, give us insights. So I'm just going to ask Emily for a moment to explain the logistics of how and when you're able to participate.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. So as Kevin mentioned, we do hope to hear from you all in a lively discussion throughout and at the end of this presentation. All of our attendees are muted upon entry, so you won't be able to naturally just chime in with your questions. There are two features in the webinar platform that you can use. You can either raise your hand and we can then call on you and unmute you to ask your question, and or you can use the questions feature and type in your question and we'll engage with you that way, reading your question and unmuting you. So I'll be keeping a close eye on those lines. Please do feel free to chat and ask your questions at any stage.
Emily, thank you very much, and I think there'll come a time towards the end where we'll ask you some questions and really try and seek your participation. So what we're timed for today's call until 3 o'clock Eastern Time, until the hour. We're going to hear first from Kai and Craig on the food loss and waste protocol. Then we're going to hand over to Kristen to hear the Google perspective, and then opening up for questions and discussion after that, I think, if I got that right. Yes,
yep,
I'm looking
perfect.
for Kai for nods. Kai, I think I'm handing over to you first.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Kevin. That's a very kind introduction. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you everybody on the phone for taking the time to join us. As Kevin mentioned, we are going to talk about food loss and waste, and before we dive into the details of this new business case and the food loss and waste protocol, since we have a bit of a mixed audience on the phone, I'm just going to take a few minutes to share a little bit of background about the topic. But I will be sharing it via a new resource, so at least for those of you who are also familiar with food loss and waste, you'll be learning a bit about a new resource available. I'm going to draw on the Center for Food Loss and Waste Solutions, which has been branded Further with Food. It's a new online resource that was launched a few weeks ago in partnership with USDA and EPA, industry trade associations. WRI is a part of this 12 partnership group, as well as other NGOs like NRDC and World Wildlife Fund. And this, as part of this Further with Food website, there's a section called Understand the Issue, which has this nice, simple compilation of the 4 questions that people ask about food loss and waste. What is it? Why does it matter? How much is there? And what can we do about it? And so I'm going to, again, really quickly, in the interest of time today, since we only have an hour, go through these items, but you can also go to the website directly and dive much deeper as you'd like. So the first question, what is food loss and waste? $1 million question. We would think it would be simple, but it's not really. The simple way to look at food loss and waste is that it is food not eaten by people for whatever reason. Some definitions and estimates, though, and this is where it starts to get complicated, also include the inedible parts, whether it's bones, rinds, pits and stones, that which may not be typically intended for consumption in one food supply chain, but then again, what's inedible is in the eye of the beholder. So that's where it starts to get complicated. I have a few photos here just to show a few examples of why food is not eaten by people. These are from my own household. I figured I should walk the talk, and full transparency. There is a moldy orange on the far left. It went bad. I was not going to feed it to my family, so that went into the compost. The middle picture are these inedible parts. This is from a cauliflower, the core and the leaves, which actually could be eaten. You can, if you're not lazy, like sometimes I want to be, you can cut them up and eat them. But the question is, when you're doing a measurement, is the food that you've thrown away, these inedible parts, are they included in your measurement or not? And it's important to be clear. Then there's leftover food, also from my own household. My daughter was sick, so there's a half leftover sandwich, which none of us wanted to eat, but she ended up eating it the next day and didn't recontaminate herself. And then there's the hot dogs. Anyway, there's lots of leftover food that may or may not get eaten. I'm proud to say my teenage son ate those hot dogs 2 minutes after I took the photo. So, if you work in an office environment, as Craig likes to say, and have interns, that's the natural source of food loss and waste reduction, or teenage children. You get rid of food loss and waste pretty quickly. But suffice it to say, there's food loss and waste that happens in the household, and it's important to also think about the supply chain, because it really happens all the way from production, farm to fork. In production, it happens on or after the field. In handling and storage, there are losses for different reasons. During processing and packaging, there are losses which occur, as well as in distribution and in the retail end of things, and then all the way to consumption. So I'm not going to go into detail on these. Suffice it to say that there are losses and waste that happen all along the food supply chain. There's also, in this question of why does it matter, food loss and waste. The benefit of food loss and waste actually in reducing it is that it can improve. It's an opportunity to improve the social, the environmental, and the economic issues that many in the business world are grappling with. So it's one of those triple win opportunities. And the website Further with Food goes into each of those items bulleted. Craig will talk a bit after I'm done here about the third bullet, increasing efficiency and avoiding unnecessary costs. And I'm just going to show one slide out of the many we could show on this topic. The environmental impact is particularly important because if food loss and waste were a country, then the amount of GHG equivalent that are emitted when food decomposes in landfills and all the embedded carbon that's up and down the supply chain of food not eaten, it's a significant amount. And so if food loss and waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of GHG. So just to put it in some perspective, it's a big issue with lots of opportunity. So how much is there? That is a good question. And as you can see here, the U.S. as one country alone has 4 different estimates, which, as we'll go into a bit of detail in a minute, is because we are talking about different definitions and scopes of these different data points. So there is no single comprehensive estimate in the U.S. There is a big number that the FAO has published, which again is an estimate. There are varying figures which vary because of whether or not they include those inedible parts I was talking about. Some data like USDA excludes the inedible parts, others don't. Which destinations are included? If you consider animal feed food loss and waste, that's a bigger figure than if you only include landfill as food loss and waste. And then data sets vary as do the methods used to collect the data. So that's why you have 4 different figures in the U.S. You can click through. If you look at the bottom right side of that slide, there is a table in which we've, in a bit more detail, but not in excruciating detail, laid out how those estimates differ and why. So you can learn more, again, on the Further with Food website. Regardless of which number you use, it's a big amount. And when you look at the data, it is important to consider that in the industrialized world, most of the food loss and waste happens on the consumption end. So in this slide, you'll see the green bars are showing that consumption and the distribution and market closer to the fork is where more of the food loss and waste happens. By contrast, in the developing economies, the yellow and red bars are higher because more of the loss and waste happens at the farm than at the household. So this last slide in my introduction is just what can we do about it. For those of you who aren't aware of it, we do have in the U.S. a national food waste reduction goal, which mirrors the Sustainable Development Goal, Target 12.3, which is calling for a 50% reduction by the year 2030. And so how do we get there? Well, there's this inverted hierarchy that's really helpful to use as a guide. If you see, this is from the EPA, at the top is source reduction and reuse, which is basically reducing the amount of surplus food generated in the first place, preventing it from ever becoming food loss and waste, taking that, you know, the proverbial hot dogs that my son chose to eat and keeping them from ever becoming a loss or a waste. That which can't be sold should be used to feed hungry people first, and then as you see cascading here, feeding animals is next, and then at the bottom is landfill incineration. So these are really useful. This is a really useful guide to think about moving food up from the least beneficial use to a more beneficial use. So I'll pause with that. I don't know if anybody has any immediate questions. I could take one question. If not, we can go right to Craig to talk more about the business case for measuring and reducing food loss and waste. Do you see any questions, Lindsay?
I'm not.
All right.
Great. Great. So it's Craig Hansen here. Let me dive into about the business case here. Kai mentioned the Sustainable Development Goal, Target 12.3. About a year ago, a group of leaders, both from the private sector and the public sector, about 40 in all, came together to help inspire ambition, mobilize action, and accelerate progress towards achieving the SDG Target 12.3, the one on food loss and waste. This group is called Champions 12.3, named after the SDG target. A question that what they've done is we've actually pulled together a number of questions that they want to see addressed to help tackle and help advance progress towards the SDG. And one question they asked last year in mid-2016 was, look, if there's so many benefits that can be generated by reducing food loss and waste, then why aren't countries, cities, and companies not already doing even more to actually address this? And so we conducted, on behalf of Champions 12.3, we conducted some research, and we started off by interviewing a number of companies as well as leaders and managers from the public sector. And what we found is that responses such as, well, there's an unclear business case, or, oh, the costs are buried in our operational budgets, or, food loss waste is just the accepted part of doing business, or even perceptions that, well, the cost of actually taking action outweigh, or we're probably going to outweigh the benefits I'm going to achieve. And so we set out actually to tackle that question, to say, is this really true? And so, next slide. And so what we've done is we've conducted an analysis, and we're going to launch next week on March 7th a publication called The Business Case for Reducing Food Loss and Waste. The research was conducted by Deborah Rye in the Waste Resources Action Program out of the United Kingdom. We dove into the numbers for a country, a city, the United Kingdom, a city, London, and then a number of companies to kind of get behind this question of, is there a business case, and if so, what does it look like? Next slide. And so what we did in particular is we took a really heavy focus on the financial case, the financial business case, realizing that at the end of the day, you got to be able to convince hard-nosed CFOs as well as hard-nosed, public budget managers. And so we looked at is, first of all, the benefits and the cost, the cost of actually understanding and then tackling food loss and waste for a country or for a company, and then the financial benefits. And we focus really on finances here. Of course, there's environmental and social benefits of reducing food loss and waste, but we opted not to quantify that economically, because we know that many CFOs don't factor that into the decisions. We wanted to stick with just the purely financial figures. We looked at individual entities, so business sites, business operations. We also looked at who pays, who benefits, recognize that in some situations the payer is different from the beneficiary, and that might lead to a misalignment of incentives for action. But when it comes to the companies and the company sites, the data I'm going to show you in a few minutes, the payor was basically the same as the beneficiary. We're looking at the food loss and waste reduction within their own operations. And interestingly here, too, we looked explicitly at and exclusively at historical data. We didn't use pro forma models, et cetera. This is looking at real historical data that entities actually have. Next slide. And so we were able to find data for nearly 1,200 business sites across 700 companies across 17 countries. This is everything we could find in terms of talking to companies whose executives happen to be members of Champions 12.3. There's a lot of data from a lot of companies that are not part of the Champions 12.3 partnership. This is everything we could find. The data, we did not cherry pick the data. We analyzed everything we get our hands on. We realized that even with 1,200 business sites, that's still a small smattering of business sites on the planet. And one of our to-dos is to get more data, especially from upstream manufacturing, food manufacturers, food producers, where we had a hard time accessing data. But that said, we ran analysis on all the data points that we could find. And what we looked at is essentially we calculated the financial costs and benefits of the items that you see here. So for instance, on the cost side, it's the cost of quantifying and monitoring food loss and waste within that business site. The cost of training the staff, right, to do something differently. In some cases, the company invested in new equipment, like new storage equipment. In some cases, the company changed their storage and handling and/or manufacturing processes, or they changed packaging and date labeling. So look at that, the real financial cost of doing these items over a 3-year period with a 10% discount factor. And then the benefits side, we looked at the costs of reducing unsold food, so they no longer had to buy as much food. In some cases, the company launched a new product line, food that otherwise would have been thrown out because, or left on the field because it didn't meet specifications, now got turned into new products that ended up on store shelves. As well as the economic, the financial savings of reducing the food waste management costs, the real financial costs. Next. And what we found across all of these On the big graph you see is the spread of the benefit-cost ratios, the benefits relative to cost of all the sites, from site number 1 all the way to site number 1168. And then in the middle section there you see the first half, taking you up to the median site benefit-cost ratio. The median benefit-cost ratio would be about 14 to 1. So 1 to 1, just for the mathematical summary here, 1 to 1 means you break even on your investment. Anything above that red line is you're making more on a discounted basis relative to the investment you made on food loss for your food loss and waste reduction effort. So the short story is that for the vast majority, about 99% of them, the investment led to a positive return on a pure financial basis. And then the next slide, and then the median, the middle site had a return of about $14 for every $1 they invested in the return. So quite a positive investment, even for the median site. Now there's a big spread, and a question we looked at is, well, how does it differ by sector? And so we've done some analysis to look at by sector, and you see here that actually the spread varies by the type of sector. If there was a pattern, and we had quite a spread of lows to highs, the general pattern was the further downstream you go, the closer to the fork you get, the higher the median return on investment was. And the further upstream, the closer to the fork, closer to the farm, the lower the return on the investment was. But it still was a positive return, right? And so you look at food manufacturing, even with a median return of 1.3 means a 30% return on investment for the manufacturing, for the food production and food manufacturing sites that were part of our data set. Whereas you go to restaurants, even the median, even though it's a huge range, the median site was basically an 8-fold return on investment that the company actually made. Next slide. And that was just looking at the financial benefits. Is the signal going across Mars and back again?
Yeah.
We also looked at basically the non-financial benefits that companies actually receive too. So much of the analysis in the paper that we're showing will look at the financial benefits. We also, a lot of the feedback we got from the more than 24 interviews that we conducted, companies talked about the non-financial reasons they actually also pursue food loss waste reduction efforts, whether it's trying to improve food security, it's meeting food waste, more broad waste regulations that they face, companies trying to meet environmental sustainability targets that they have in place, including their commitments, their voluntary commitments, say, to greenhouse gas emissions reductions. One thing we strongly heard was the stakeholder relationships, especially for companies that are pretty close to the consumer. The relationships they have, being able to show to their consumer that they are actually taking actions to be very efficient within their operations. Likewise, we saw companies, even food retailers, starting to work more upstream with their suppliers to help tackle food losses further upstream. And finally, at the end of the point, I heard many CEOs just say, at the end of the day, this is also the right thing to do. And so that was also a contributing factor to these companies taking proactive steps to reduce food loss and waste. And so what we conclude with in our business case for reducing food loss and waste is basically a three-step strategy for tackling food loss and waste. First, set targets. Targets set ambition. Ambition motivates action. Secondly, measure. As we all know, what gets measured gets managed, and you're going to hear a bit more in a few seconds about best practices in measuring. And then finally, act. Act upon that information. Once you know where your hot spots of food loss and waste are, put in place those practices and policies and programs to reduce food loss and waste where it's most prevalent. And I'll turn things back over to Kai.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Again, I'll pause for a question or two if Lindsay, you're seeing anything come up. All right, great. Well, we can take questions at the end as well, so I want to make sure that if somebody has something burning, that we address it in the middle. So as Craig mentioned, this notion of what gets measured gets managed is really important and was the foundation for the development of the Food Loss and Waste Protocol, which, as you see on the screen, is a collaboration amongst 7 organizations. WRI serves as the secretariat, but there are 6 other groups who have been very actively involved in developing, through the protocol, the Food Loss and Waste Accounting and Reporting Standard. The private sector is represented by the CGF and the WBCSD, We have two very important UN agencies, FAO and UNEP, who do a lot of work on food loss and waste, and then two technical groups as well, Fusions and RAP. Before I go further into talking about the standard, I am going to, would like to ask how many of you actually feel that your level of understanding with the standard is high or low. So a quick polling question Lindsay's going to put up on the webinar, which we think we can get, yep, we got the technology to work there. Could you take a minute, please, on the phone and mark 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 about how well you currently understand what's in the food loss and waste standard. And we realize people will be at different points in their understanding, but just going to get a sense going in. We have about 30 seconds, Lindsay, to do that. So Lindsay told me we're about 1, 2, or 3 is where most people are falling right now. So that's really helpful for us to understand. So I give you as much detail as possible, but don't assume that you are very familiar with the standard. The standard itself, after being developed over 2.5 years through the input of multiple discussions, pilot testing, input from about 200 stakeholders around the world. It was launched in June of 2016, so about 6 or so months ago. And the standard, oops, okay, you may be able to see my screen. It looks like it's gone on ours, but that's okay. The standard itself was designed to be globally relevant. So we had input from stakeholders all around the world. It is a voluntary standard. It's similar in that case to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is also a voluntary standard, but was developed to be form the foundation and provide a basis for quantifying and reporting, in that case, on GHG emissions. In this case, where this standard is about requirements and guidance for quantifying and reporting on the amount of food loss and waste. So the standard itself, as I mentioned, is globally relevant, which means, and broadly applicable, which means that a farmer, producer, then the agricultural sector could be using it, a retailer could be using it, a city can use it, a country can use it. It's meant to be used, again, by anybody who is looking to measure and quantify food loss and waste. And so given that it's designed for a wide audience, the standard provides a clear foundation and clear requirements and guidance so that when you're comparing one inventory to another, there's a common set of language terms to use so that you can determine when comparing data if you're comparing apples to apples or apples to chicken pot pie, which clearly are not the same. And without the standard, there's been a lack of clear definitions and a lack of consistent and transparent disclosure. The standard aims to remedy that. As Craig mentioned too, what gets measured gets managed. So the benefits of using a standard are multiple ones. Number one, as you see here, is that it really does help to have a standard way of quantifying food loss to be able to track progress. Without a baseline, clearly, as you all know well from your own businesses, baselines matter if you want to set a target and track how you're doing along the way. In addition to which, understanding where the food loss and waste is generated is critically important. So the amount matters, but as important is understanding where and why it happened. But the standard provides that framework so that companies and others can identify where the food loss and waste is going, from that identify where the hot spots are, and from that identify the most appropriate targeted strategies. So there are 3 questions to ask when measuring food loss and waste, and they build on each other. The first is the driver, why someone is measuring food loss and waste really drives what is included in the measurement, and that'll become a bit more clear as I talk through the standard. The what also dictates how food loss and waste is quantified, what methods you use, what level of accuracy you need, etc. I'm going to talk a little bit about the what in particular, because that is where the standard is really its most powerful. When you think about food, it starts out at the top of the slide here as plants, fungi, and animals, of which there are some amount of food and some amount of inedible parts. Let's take a banana. There's the flesh, which we typically consider in the Western world to be the food, and the inedible parts, which are the skin. Along the way, food is consumed somehow, somewhere along the line. And if it's not, it goes into what we've called this proverbial yellow box, where you see food that's not consumed and the associated inedible parts that may go to one of 10 possible destinations. And so the scope of the standard is this yellow box. The interesting and useful thing that I've really been told by a lot of people is that the standard does not say this is the only definition of food loss and waste, but rather it allows a particular entity to select which combination of the material types, the food and or the inedible parts are being measured. And the standard also allows a company, country, others to pick which destinations, which of those 10 destinations it considers for its particular goals of quantification to be the food loss and waste. So again, the why drives your definition of food loss and waste, which therefore drives the what is being quantified. So a little bit more on what that looks like. The material type, there's a simple apple, has its core and its stems, which you could consider the inedible parts. That's 10% of weight according to USDA's data set. The skin, if you were to say that's inedible parts for the particular purpose of your food supply chain, you're not using the apples as being intended for people to eat. That's another 13%. So if you were to measure food loss and waste, it needs to be really clear whether or not you're including food and the inedible parts or both, because again, that affects the figures.
Kai, can I ask you a question as
Yeah.
we're going along? Is that
Sure.
Are those percentages by weight?
That's by weight according to the USDA for a typical raw apple. And so there are some data on breaking down the inedible parts in the food. And many companies are choosing to measure both. And it's important from a resource efficiency standpoint because it takes resources to grow the entire food, not just separately the flesh. But it's, again, depending on why you're measuring. If you're only looking at food security and what could have been or should have been eaten by people, then the inedible parts may be subtracted. And in fact, that's what FAO did in their 2011 study. Inedible parts are subtracted out. So again, it's important to understand because the number will be bigger if you include inedible. In terms of the other important part of the definition of food loss and waste and what's in the scope is the destinations, and there's 10 listed. There's a set of definitions in the standard itself. I won't go into them today, but we can talk about them further if you'd like. So what this looks like when you go back to the data I showed, the 4 data points. Here's the USDA data versus the EPA data, and you can see USDA's data excludes inedible parts, and it has 8 of the 10 destinations included. By contrast, the EPA, it's the smaller figure. Why? Because while it has food and inedible parts included, it only includes 2 of the destinations for their disposed data point. So using the standard helps one understand what is an inventory, why do they differ, and can you or can you not compare them. Another example, other parts of the scope go beyond material type destination to be about time frame, boundary, and related issues. I'm not going to go into depth right now, but we can later if people have questions. This is the scope of food waste proposed to the European Commission. So yet another example where this time the European Commission is focused on circular economy and resource efficiency, so food and inedible parts are included, and it includes 8 out of the 10 destinations. So you'll see animal feed is excluded, as is bio-based materials and biochemical processing. The standard also includes guidance on how to quantify food loss and waste. So this is the how part of the question. There's guidance on 10 of these methods. The standard does not require a specific method, but it does require disclosure of what method did you use so that one can compare one inventory to another. And there are these resources available on the protocol website. Summing this up, there's really 3 ways in which I'm seeing people are using the food loss and waste standard and the related tools. In some cases, entities are just using the standards language to define what they mean by food loss and waste, really focusing on that visual you saw about the time frame, material types, destinations, and boundary to say, this is what I mean by food loss and waste, because that's not, there's 3 words or 4 words, but people have, hundreds of different definitions attached to those 4 words of food loss and waste. To be in conformance with the standard requires reporting against these 8 requirements that are listed in the standard. They are pretty straightforward, with the main one really being describing and clearly defining the scope using the language of the standard. And then the standard document itself, which you can download from the website, has a lot of related guidance on how do you make decisions and how do you implement the requirements and helps really a user go through thinking about the what, why, what, and how of measurement. So one of my main tips here is to start with the executive summary if you haven't read the standard yet. It's a short 12-page document and really boils down to the basics, the standard, so you don't have to read the entire report from cover to cover. And some helpful hints we've learned along the way from others is that it's really helpful to build on current data, use waste collection receipts if you have them, or scanner and shrink data for retailers. A lot of manufacturers have inputs and output inventories of their materials. So you don't have to gather new data. A lot of the data is already existing. Just maybe a matter of finding it and bringing it together. Key is to figure out who has the data, operations or others. And you don't need a super accurate number to get started. I know there's some on the phone who've measured so far, and it's, getting us total numbers is the first place to start, and then you get more granular as you go along. And clearly, we've heard as well people say that measurement itself actually triggers prevention. Once you start seeing how much food loss and waste there is, it starts to go down automatically. So that's another benefit of measurement. And last but not least, as you saw, there were 10 destinations, and one of them is landfill, but that's at the bottom of that EPA food recovery hierarchy we were showing. And so thinking about bringing the food up to more beneficial uses is really important so that we move beyond just landfill diversion. And with that, I'm just going to leave you this last slide to share that we are really focused this year on promoting adoption and use of the standard. We are doing a series of news updates, so please feel free to sign up on the FL Protocol website. We'll be highlighting users of the standard through case studies. We'll be doing translations, trainings, and then a database and inventory reporting platforms under development. Again, you can go back and talk about any of those. And I just want to close with my portion here about acknowledging our funders, because they've been really critical to getting us to the point we are today. So a shout out to the 6 funders here who've been helping the Food Loss and Waste Initiative succeed. And with that, Lindsay, if you have any questions, great. Otherwise, we could go to Kristen from Google. While we're transitioning the presentation decks, can you post one more time a question now about whether or not people feel like they have improved their understanding of the Food Loss and Waste Standard? It feels like a loaded question, but...
And Kai, could I ask you one question?
Yes.
So in the carbon world, which I'm more familiar with, in the climate world, when you finish the protocol as a company, you're able to say, my carbon emissions are X thousand tons of carbon, and if somebody wants an extra level of detail, and you'll say, and here's how they're divided into scope 1, 2, and 3. And that sort of sums up years of work and pages of protocol. What's the equivalent thing a company would tell you when they've completed the Food Loss and Waste Protocol? Well,
it's very similar. Here's our data, here's our number.
But the number being, here's how much waste.
Here's how much food loss and waste we have generated.
Right.
The key being, again, the definitions. It's scope, and we don't use 1, 2, and 3, but what do we mean by that?
Yeah.
What material types, what destinations, et cetera. And the 8 requirements, the core of the requirements are what is the scope and how was it quantified? And then the other requirements are around that. Report in tons or pounds. Report your unit of measurement, and report if you sampled or scaled the data. So really, it boils down to the what and the how.
Do I also tell you as a company how much edible food? So 1 million tons of food that was eaten and 200,000 tons that was waste? It's
not required. So the standard just requires saying, are you including both the food and the inedible parts, or just the food, or just the inedible parts? Right. We have language in there, and this is why the guidance is, is more. The guidance in the standard is lengthier because we have a chapter in there on if you do want to separate food from inedible parts. Here's some guidance on how you go about doing so. And if you separate the data, it is useful to report it, at least internally, separately, so you can keep track of the different amounts. But you don't have to. There's a lot of recommendations in the guidance in the standard that are not requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Lindsay, are you able to post? Could you post the question?
I did that.
Okay, great. So I presume the question was up because I turned away from my screen that asked, do you feel this webinar has improved your understanding?
Yes.
And how are you finding?
That at a level 3.
Up to level 3. Okay, so we've seen movement. That's good. Great, thank you. So I'm going to turn this over to Kristen.
We just won't let them go till it's at a 5.
Yeah, we're going to ask you again at the very end of this. So Kristen, over to you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me today. My name is Kristen Rainey, and I'm from the Google Food team. And I'd love to spend the next few minutes sharing with you how Google is thinking about food waste within our internal employee food program on our campuses. Next one. You can go to the next slide. Maybe there's a slight delay. Oh, great. Thank you. So I'm not sure how many of you have actually been on our campuses before or eaten a meal there. So I'd love to just spend a minute sharing a bit of context. So if you were an employee at our global headquarters in Mountain View, California, which is about 30 miles south of San Francisco, you'd have a choice of over 50 cafes where you might pick up breakfast and later lunch. And you could also grab a quick coffee or fruit or a snack at one of our over 250 micro kitchens, which are in all of our buildings on that campus. And if you needed to work late at night, there are also a number of cafes that also offer dinner. So to give you a sense of the scale of the program, we serve over 160,000 meals per day across 56 countries where Google has offices. Next slide. So you might think that all we do around there is eat, and it's true, we do a lot of eating. And you can go to the next one. So why do we even have an internal food program and an entirely subsidized program at that? Well, there's a number of different reasons that really make sense to us. So first, we want to support Googlers being at their best today and over the long haul. And on a simplistic level, you could say there's really a pretty clear ROI to have food on campus as opposed to having tens of thousands of Googlers trying to get to downtown Mountain View and back every lunchtime, if you think about the time and the hassle of parking alone. But it's also a key part of our culture, so we take pride in the fact that it's one of the key perks that's highlighted in Fortune's Best Places to Work list, which Google has topped at #1 7 times. It's one of the many ways that the company can attract and retain top talent. And having time to engage with teammates is also really invaluable. Next slide. Because you never know when the next great idea, like Gmail, might be envisioned over the back of a napkin at lunchtime. Next slide. We're in the process right now of refining the food team's sustainability approach, and you'll see that we're working on issues like food waste, as well as water, energy, and shifting diets to be more plant-forward. And finally, transparency is also a critical component. Next slide. So I was happy to see earlier today that the EPA food waste hierarchy was shown, and we really follow this. We really think that this guidance is really helpful in helping us focus our efforts. So while there's many things that we can do and are doing to reduce waste, like composting, we can have the greatest impact if we focus on source reduction, which is the top of the diagram. So if you think about it, if you don't produce that extra tray of lasagna to begin with, you don't have to compost it. And then you could use those team members who'd spent their time making and composting the lasagna, they can do other things. So it's very efficient financially as well. Next slide. So here you have the food loss and waste protocol that I've filled out on behalf of the Google Food Program, and you can see that food waste is most likely going to those with a green check mark, and you can see that the boundary column is showing that we're looking at all of our cafe food waste, and we're looking at the geography, we're looking at all over the world, the US, EMEA, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. And we're looking at 102 cafes which are tracking the pre-consumer food waste out of 208 cafes we have total. We also have a post-consumer waste pilot where we're tracking the Googlers' plate waste, and we've had some great success with that so far, and we're looking to expand that. Next slide. So what we're using in order to help measure our food waste, both pre-consumer, which is what we focused on, and post-consumer that I just mentioned earlier, is we're using LeanPath. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, it's a scale and a camera that we have in the back of house in our kitchens. And when a team member is about to put something in the compost or donate it, they would first put it on the scale, take a picture of it, and add some information so that we have that data which all goes up to the cloud. The advantage of a system like this is that we can see all the data live, and you can see trends and you can compare cafes one against another. We also realize that it's not enough just to have a system like this. It's really important that the sites are using it well. So that means, is the whole team engaged and trained? Is a new team member trained right away, given that there's turnover in food service? And are they bringing it up at pre-meal meetings? And are they using that data to inform production levels? Also, this tool also allows us to track donations. And while we really don't focus our energy around donations, we really focus on source reduction, we do have donation programs in place where it's legal to do so. Next slide. At the end of last year, Google released its first ever environmental report, and we were really happy that our team's food waste efforts were featured in that report. Next slide. So here you can see some just basic data about our food waste tracking efforts. So we have, now we have 105 cafes using the program, and we've been able to show that we have a significant amount of pre-consumer waste that's been recorded, and overall, you know, over 2 million pounds that otherwise would have been wasted. So we're really excited about our results so far, and we're continuing to expand the program at new cafes, and as well we're interested in expanding the post-consumer program I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So how do we define success? Google is a tricky environment in that we don't have a point of sale, so because it's subsidized, no one's paying for their meals, and we don't know exactly how many people are eating in a cafe every day. So what we finally have arrived at through a lot of thought is a couple different metrics to help us define success. So first, we want to ensure that we're collecting enough data. So a 95% data capture rate is critical for us. And the second metric we're looking at is what we're calling a food efficiency ratio, or FER. And what that stands for is our food waste over our food spend. So a lower percentage means that a site is being more efficient with its spend. So we're going for a target of 2 to 4% food efficiency ratio. 2% is more efficient than 3, and 3% is more efficient than 4. We also want to ensure that all sites have a SMART goal in place at all times, so that they're really looking at the data and really targeting it at specific areas where they can improve. And then finally, having a champion or a co-champion in place at all times, which is basically someone on site at that cafe, usually a chef, who really owns it for that site and is really spearheading it. Next slide. We now also have 2 specific OKRs, which stands for Objectives and Key Results, at Google overall for our sustainability efforts. And that means we're now accountable for making progress in these 2 areas that we've outlined, waste and water. So the first one, drive waste reduction in our global operations, and then our second one is establish a global water strategy. And we're actually working with WRI on looking at our water throughout, not just the food program, but looking at it throughout all of our real estate. Next slide. We also have a number of partners who we're working with on various sustainability initiatives. So in addition to LeanPath, who I mentioned earlier, who's our key partner in terms of our food waste tracking efforts, we're also working with 5 other external partners on sustainability initiatives. So the Culinary Institute of America's Menus of Change initiative is something we're working on as far as focusing on plant-forward diets. With WRI, I mentioned earlier, we're working with them on a water analysis. We're also working with them on something called Better Buying Lab, which is how do we shift diets and make plant-forward dishes more mainstream. The third, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, we're working with them on the FRESH program, which stands for Food Reform for Sustainability and Health, and that's working with over 20 other leading global companies. The fourth is Board Bia. Board Bia is Ireland's food board. It has a sustainability initiative called Orange and Green, aiming for Ireland's food and beverages to be known for their sustainability commitment. And we're working with them to certify our Compass at Google Dublin office with the Orange and Green certification. Finally, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is focused on circular economies, and we're working with some other folks internally at Google on expanding the partnership with them so that food is one of the project areas that we're focusing on. We're really excited about the opportunities there. And that's it for me today, but I'd be happy to answer any questions, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Kristen. Lindsay's probably the one who's going to be getting any questions that are coming in. If not, I'm actually curious, and maybe I'll turn it over to Kevin. I know some folks on the phone have been trying to focus their companies on food loss and waste, and if anybody's on the phone, if not, I'll call on somebody who would like to share maybe how they've made the case internally for measuring food loss and waste. I think it would be really helpful for others to hear. So anybody on the phone who's interested in sharing?
If you'd like to volunteer, you can press the raise your hand button so that we can unmute you.
Looks like we've got Brian. Brian, you are unmuted.
Hi, everyone. Brian Kramer with PepsiCo. So as part of our kind of larger performance with purpose goals, we've been advancing kind of our commitment around food loss and waste in alignment with the work that we're doing with Consumer Goods Forum. So we've been doing a deeper dive, working with Kai and some of the WRI team, looking more at our own operations where we see the greatest kind of opportunity for reduction, and kind of much of our historic focus has been within our own manufacturing operations, as part of our kind of zero waste to landfill commitments. So we're in the process of kind of taking that a step further and looking at where we're manufacturing products and seeing those materials through our distribution supply chain potentially coming back into our control, and today where that we have an opportunity for donating that or finding more beneficial use versus having beverages go down the drain or having product come through and after it's expired and not being able to utilize that. So that's kind of the direction that we've been going, building on the work within our own manufacturing. But Kristen, really interesting to see how you're taking that at kind of the cafe level and giving us some really good ideas that we can take to our food service team. So thanks for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, Brian, this is Kevin. Could I, maybe if you don't mind, as you volunteered to speak, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. It's always seemed to me that there's a business case to be made for reducing waste in your supply chain because that reduces cost. There's a business case to be made for reducing waste in your own operations because that also reduces cost. But the biggest challenge, it would seem to me, is that in some ways, if a consumer buys something from you that then gets wasted, it's hard for you to make a business case to reduce that because you're still getting the revenue for the thing that they waste. Have you found a way to tackle that challenge, or is it not the problem I think it is? That piece of how do you get consumers not to buy stuff they don't need, or how do you persuade the company that you should be able to reduce the amount consumers buy so that they don't waste stuff at home?
So Kevin, I mean, from the work that we've been doing, I think probably around right-sizing packaging and the ability to kind of maintain that value proposition, but also reduce food waste. To be honest, it's an area that I think we're all seeing kind of how can we influence that. It hasn't been a huge kind of direct amount of involvement for us at the moment, but I think that's a great question as well, and whether that's looking at your best buy dating and some of those types of things, as well as finding the right size so we're able to maintain that value proposition, but not seeing product that we want our consumers to enjoy being improperly disposed of and not being eaten.
Brian, thanks, and I'm going to put someone else on the spot. Is Marie still on? Packaging, Tetra Pak. Is this a business opportunity for you guys?
Marie, I've taken you off mute, although I see that you are still muted on your end.
Hey, I'm online now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot a bit.
Yeah, no worries. I think there could have been someone better from our end to answer the questions, but I think definitely it's an opportunity for us, and we're looking into that. That's like one key aspect when we are developing our machinery that we are trying to make those as efficient as possible. And as mentioned already earlier, also the offering different sizes of packaging is an option, but we are the packaging supplier and processing equipment or packaging equipment supplier for our customers like PepsiCo in this supply chain. So our perspective is a bit different. And I was here just barely to learn and listen.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Have we got other? Anybody else? Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So just I'm curious if let me ask it this way: is there anybody on the phone struggling to make the business case for measuring food loss and waste? And you don't have to identify yourself if you want to say yes or raise. I mean, can you unmute people, or do you have to raise what's the way they would respond?
If you'd like to speak, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. But just to kind of show that yes, you're answering in the affirmative, you can also just type that into the questions box.
And the reason I'm asking is because I often hear, and this is why Craig work and others work so closely on this developing this business case, is because it is, without knowing how much food you're wasting, it's hard to make the case to reduce it. It's a bit of a chicken and egg type phenomenon, and food is a perishable product, so it does it's hard to sometimes literally get your hands around it and quantify the amount, and so it's hidden. That, and then there's the labor issues, which I hear a lot of times in, when looking at who's on the phone, in the Caesars or Disney environment, you've got a lot of people touching the food, and they have a lot of other responsibilities besides measuring the amount that's not eaten. So I see. Looks like is there a question? Do you have any responses, Lindsay? Pardon me.
Great. We did get some feedback on the line here, noting that the struggle is more about focusing on how to change existing practices and measurements. That measurement is the biggest challenge.
So changing existing practices. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we hear that as well because, and maybe Kristen, I don't know if you can address that a bit, because LeanPath is a system that's been designed, my understanding is, to take that out of the equation, to make it easy. Even though you're plugging in a new system, you make it makes it easy to quantify. Did you have a struggle with that initially, at least?
In terms of just the whole measurement process, or in terms of getting? I mean, the tool itself is quite user-friendly and in multiple languages for team members who are not strong in English. I think the challenges for us have been a whole range of just different things. Just regular engagement from team members when they're just quite busy in the kitchen and really trying to ensure that they're just getting food out and ensuring service is great. There's just a lot of other potential distractions, so this is just one more thing in their to-do list, but it's really fast. I mean, LeanPath likes to talk about it, that it's really the amount of time it would take to wash your hands that it takes to really to measure something. So I think once a team member is properly trained, things are much easier after that, and ensuring that there's really a leader at that site who's really championing it and really really influencing others. That also seems to matter for us quite a lot.
Thank you, Kristen. I do see we have one more question, but we've run out of time, so I'll capture these questions that are in the chat so that we can be sure to take those as offline follow-ups. Kevin, did you want to wrap us up?
Yes, I will. I'm going to thank everybody. Craig, explain to us the business case for reducing waste. I think you said 14 times return, Craig, on the business case for waste was the median, right? Was just the median. Kai gave us some great insights into her family's dinner table. And then I'm sure your children will thank you for that if they know about it. And then the methodology and the scope. So Kai, thank you for that. And Kristen, thank you for explaining LeanPath. I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call who are envious that you can actually get your employees to do all that photographing and weighing, and that's great. And also I was very interested in that food efficiency ratio 2 to 4% target. I thought that was a great target. We mentioned a few other programs. Better Buying Lab was mentioned, obviously Food Loss and Waste Protocol, our water program. If you've got any questions about any of those, just let us know. Emily can help connect you with the right people on any of those programs. And our next webinar is going to be at the end of March. We haven't fixed the date yet, but it will be, as I mentioned earlier, on tomorrow's markets, on consumption patterns in the future, and the need to look at transforming our business models if we're going to meet all of the targets we need to meet as consumption grows in markets around the world. So thank you, everybody. Emily, is there any last words?
Just keep an eye out for more information about our upcoming events in the next CCG newsletter.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.